Hi, my name's Tom. Welcome back to my channel and to another episode of What the Theory, my series in which I aim to provide some sometimes fun but always accessible introductions to key theories in cultural studies and the wider humanities. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Aristotle's The Poetics, a treatise composed by everyone's favourite Greek philosopher sometime between 335 and 350 BC, depending on who you ask. Within it, he looks at the social role of storytelling, as well as setting out to understand exactly how Greek tragedy was able to make its audiences feel such extreme emotion. As always, if you have any thoughts or questions as we go along, then please do feel free to drop those down in the comments. And if this video seems like your kind of thing and you'd like to see more, please do consider subscribing and hitting that little notifications button. With that out of the way, however, let's crack on with it. It's hard to understate the influence of the Poetics. The treatise as we read it today is likely either a set of notes prepared in preparation for delivering a lecture by Aristotle himself, or taken by a student while listening to Aristotle speak within the academy. And what survives is only a fragment of a slightly longer piece of work. As we'll see, the surviving portion of the Poetics sets out to understand how Greek tragedy, or for our purposes storytelling slightly more generally, works. However, Aristotle references within it a companion piece on comedy, which unfortunately has been lost to time. Nonetheless, as the earliest surviving piece of cultural criticism that we have, alongside the Natya Shastra, which is a treatise on Sanskrit theatre written around the same time, the Poetics hold something of a special status amongst creators and critics of theatre, film, television, novel writing, and all other kind of narrative forms. And the Poetics is often introduced as a kind of rulebook, a guide to plotting out the perfect narrative. This was certainly the view of the French neoclassicists in the 16th and 17th century, who very much used the Poetics as the foundations of their formula for creating the perfect theatrical play. And even more recently, Robert McKee, the screenwriting tutor, whose 1997 book Story is considered by many to be the definitive book on storytelling, has built a small fortune on Aristotelian foundations. Nonetheless, we don't know for sure whether Aristotle's intentions in writing the Poetics was really to create this kind of prescriptive model for narrative structure. While within it, he certainly separates out some work which he considers to be good from that which he considers to be bad, we don't know whether he was suggesting that this is the way that all tragedy should work, or whether he was simply commenting on what had worked and what hadn't amongst the plays that he had seen. What is clear, however, is that Aristotle believed in the power and importance of storytelling. He thought that it had a pivotal role to play in society. And before we go through understanding Aristotle's conceptualization of narrative structure, I think it's first important to understand this slightly broader argument in the Poetics, in which Aristotle attempts to theorize why we tell stories in the first place. And in order to do so, we need to begin with Plato, Aristotle's teacher, to whom the Poetics is essentially a response. In the Republic, Plato's book in which he aims to set out his vision for an ideal society, Plato had suggested a strict censorship of poetry and drama. In one passage, he suggests that we must delete lamentations and pitiful speeches on the part of famous men. We surely assert that the good man does not think death to be a dreadful thing to another good man, his friend. Plato, in fact, saw little value in the mimetic arts, those which seek to reflect or represent real life at all. But here, his main concern is that seeing a heroic figure in a moment of despair or distress would make the citizens of his republic feel sad or angry or distressed too. And this just wouldn't do. Why would a society want its citizens to feel such negative emotions? Plato was concerned that if I were to use my afternoon off to go to the amphitheatre and while there watch Electra and Orestes avenge their father by murdering Clytemnestra, I might come away from the amphitheatre so spiked up on this spirit of revenge that I might go about killing anyone who's ever done me wrong too. Aristotle, however, had a different view. While he agreed that poetry and drama could certainly stir up these extreme emotions in us, he suggested that we don't simply carry these emotions back with us into our daily lives. Instead, Aristotle argues that experiencing such emotions within the amphitheatre or indeed in the cinema in front of the TV or whilst reading a book enables, through pity and fear, the proper purgation or catharsis of these emotions. In short, Aristotle argues that fiction and storytelling creates a space for us where we can explore and experience these extreme emotions in order to get them out of our system. My watching Orestes murder Clytemnestra then allows me to experience that feeling and burn off some of that pent-up rage that I might be feeling, precisely in order that I don't go about avenging people in real life. Thus, in Aristotle's view, tragedy, or storytelling more generally, allows us to purge ourselves of these extreme emotions, and thus plays a positive societal role in allowing us to live more happily alongside one another. Aristotle, however, was not content with simply arguing that storytelling provides a positive social function, as well as suggesting that it is able to bring about this catharsis or purgation. He also wanted to explore exactly how it is able to do so. How is it that me sitting in an amphitheatre and watching a troupe of actors pretending to hate each other or be in love enables me to feel those emotions too? In the Poetics, then, Aristotle sets out to analyse numerous pieces of Greek theatre in order to consider why some of these were able to stir up such emotion in their audience and why others weren't so much. And Aristotle's specific focus is on Greek tragedy, which he very much saw as the highest form of storytelling. And so his first task is to define exactly what he means by tragedy. For Aristotle, then, tragedy was defined in opposition to two things primarily, the first being comedy. And, always looking for a more eloquent way of expressing himself other than one is funny, the other often sad, he writes that the distinction which marks off tragedy from comedy is that comedy aims at representing people as worse, tragedy as better than in actual life. While, as I've mentioned, Aristotle's specific treatise on comedy is unfortunately lost to time, what is clear from this statement is that Aristotle considers comedy to focus on characters who are irrevocably flawed. They are never going to become better people. Whereas the mark of tragedy is that it focuses on heroic figures who give eloquent speeches and enact acts of great significance. He mentions a number of times throughout the Poetics that Greek tragedy tended to focus on a select few families from Greek legend, and he saw this as very much right and proper. The second thing that Aristotle is keen to define tragedy against is epic poetry, works such as Homer's The Iliad or the Odyssey. And the first distinction he draws between these is fairly uncontroversial, that of form. For while the epic poet, Aristotle states, imitates by narrative, the tragedian presents all his characters as living and moving before us. As we might expect, one relies on dictation and narration, while the other relies on performers acting out events in front of us. So far, so uncontroversial. However, Aristotle also draws another distinction between epic poetry and tragedy, which has proven slightly more contested in the centuries since. And these further distinctions relate not to form, recited or acted out, but to the way in which the narrative of the two is structured. Firstly, Aristotle argues that tragedy endeavours as far as possible to confine itself to a single revolution of the sun, or but slightly to exceed this limit, whereas the epic action has no limits of time. Secondly, he suggests that an epic poem has a multiplicity of plot, whereas a tragedy has a unity of plot. Or to put it in other words, an epic poem tended to have numerous narrative elements all interweaving, whereas a tragedy focused on a single focused chain of events. And it is from these very short observations that we get the notion of the three classical unities of action, place, and time. This notion that a play should take place within a day, be set in a single location, and have a very focused dramatic action was very popular during the 16th and 17th centuries, and even has a significant influence on some more recent playwrights such as Henrik Ibsen and Arthur Miller. However, while it remains a popular point of reference, we should probably take this notion of the three unities with a little bit of a pinch of salt, for Aristotle never once mentions a unity of place, and only mentions this unity of time once. And furthermore, again, we don't know whether Aristotle is simply commenting on the plays he has seen rather than trying to set out this formulaic way of setting out a narrative structure. So, we should probably take the notion of the three classical unities as more an invention of the French neoclassicists' interpretation of the Poetics rather than an idea inherent in Aristotle's writing himself. Having defined what he means by tragedy then, Aristotle finally comes to exploring what it is that made certain Greek tragedies so evocative for their audiences. And, in doing so, he introduces a number of terms for analysing narrative structure which remain incredibly significant and influential today. As you may have gathered from the way I've been talking so far, Aristotle's focus is very much on plot over character. While he does acknowledge that creating complex, interesting characters is important in writing a decent play, he suggests that character determines people's qualities, but it is by their actions that they are happy or the reverse. Dramatic action, therefore, is not with the view to the representation of character. Character comes in as subsidiary to the actions. Plot, then, is the first principle, and, as it were, the soul of a tragedy. Character holds the second place. Aristotle believed that it is not through well-drawn-out characters giving wordy speeches that this process of catharsis or purgation is brought about, but through a successful arrangement of the incidents. And what always strikes me when returning to the Poetics is how little is changed in how we discuss the arranging of events to make for a decent plot since Aristotle laid out this work. Even the most casual filmgoer will have heard of the notion that most mainstream films tend to be composed around a three-act narrative structure. And while the notion that a story should be split into a sequence of acts is more correctly attributed to the Roman poet Horace, who advocated for 5, many of the more specific moments that proponents of a three-act structure theory suggest should be there within that structure very much come from Aristotle's The Poetics. So, Aristotle observes that every tragedy falls into two parts: complication and unravelling. The first half of a tragedy, he suggests, usually contains a number of events where a protagonist progresses towards a certain goal, with their path towards achieving that goal becoming more and more complicated as time wears on. Once a plot has begun to unfold, however, Aristotle suggests that there will be a moment referred to in ancient Greek as peripeteia, or reversal, a change of circumstance which fundamentally shifts the world of this play and causes the hero's journey to go in a very different direction. In Oedipus Rex, for example, the complication consists of Oedipus trying to track down the murderer of Laius, the former king of Thebes. All of this changes in episode 4, however, when Oedipus discovers that it was in actual fact he who killed Laius, that Laius was his father and therefore Jocasta, his wife, his biological mother. In Oedipus Rex, this moment of peripeteia, or reversal, is conjoined with a moment of what is referred to as anagnorisis, or recognition, in which Oedipus finally discovers the true nature of his situation. It is these moments of peripeteia and anagnorisis, reversal and recognition, through which Aristotle suggests that the play goes from complication to unravelling. And it's very much in the process of unravelling that Aristotle suggests that catharsis comes about. But there are two more moments which are vital, according to Aristotle, to bringing about this catharsis. And the first is a scene of pathos, or suffering, during which the protagonist and other characters wrestle with the consequences of that great reversal. This scene, he suggests, is a destructive or painful action, such as the death on the stage, bodily agony, wounds, and the like. In Oedipus Rex, we get a bit of both, when Jocasta hangs herself and Oedipus, so disgusted at himself for sleeping with his own mother, stabs out his own eyes with the pin of her brooch. And finally, these moments of reversal, recognition, and suffering lead to the moment of catharsis itself. In Oedipus Rex, this takes place when Oedipus, so disgusted at himself, asks to be exiled from Thebes. So, complication, reversal, recognition, suffering, and catharsis, these to Aristotle are the moments which we must include in a plot in order to bring about that catharsis or purgation amongst an audience. It is the proper arrangement of these incidents which allows storytelling to have that power of making us feel emotions through simply watching or reading something. And these terms, or at least the notion of them, very much carry currency in the present day. If we look at the narrative structures offered up by contemporary screenwriting tutors such as Robert McKee, or slightly less subtly Blake Snyder, for example, we'll see moments such as a midpoint, which very much has reflections of the moment of reversal, or in Blake Snyder, the dark night of the soul, which very much seems to echo that notion of pathos or suffering. Aristotle's thoughts within this very earliest work of cultural criticism then very much underline how we talk about and analyse narrative structure in the present day. So to conclude, in the Poetics, Aristotle sets out to argue that storytelling has a vital social role to play in allowing us to purge ourselves of the extreme emotions that we might otherwise feel in real life. And further to this, he seeks to analyse exactly how Greek tragedy is able to perform this function. And while the Poetics itself very much confines itself to Greek tragedy, the terms which are discussed within it have very much become applicable in the present day to all kinds of narrative storytelling, whether that be theatre or film or television or novels. The Poetics in its present day form then may be a short and somewhat understated book. However, the ideas which Aristotle offers us within it have certainly stood the test of time. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found it useful and of some insight. If that is the case, then I'd really appreciate a thumbs up down below. And again, if you'd like to see more like this, then please do consider subscribing. Thank you very much for watching once again, and have a great week.